Hello everyone, my name is Emily and today I will be going over lesson 3 of advanced JavaScript, which will go over object-oriented programming. An overview of today is that we'll be learning the difference between object-oriented programming and objects. We will also be learning how to add functions to constructors, and we will learn how to use object-oriented programming. First, we'll go over some review questions, so as I go over these, feel free to pause the video, think about the answer, and then resume the video. First, how do we access information from an object? We access information from an object by using dot notation or bracket notation. Next, how do we change a property of an object? You can change the property of an object by saying object name dot property name is equal to new value. If that property name does not already exist, it will create a new property. Last, when should we use objects? We should use objects when we want to store multiple values of different kinds. So first, let's talk about what object-oriented programming is. Object-oriented programming is a different way for creating objects where you create a constructor, which is like a template for creating the object. Then when you want to create new objects, you can call the constructor function, which constructs the object. So this is an example of a constructor that helps you define book objects. So scenario 1, you're creating a game and you need to create a wizard who can use magic. What is some information you might need to know to create an enemy? Try to think of this and then go ahead and feel free to resume the video once you're done thinking of it. So some things that you might want to know are type of magic, location, health, mana, and skills. Scenario 2, you run a dog shelter and you need to keep track of all the dogs. As a result, you've created a program that stores their data. What are some properties and attributes you will store? Some properties and attributes you might store include age, breed, gender, and name. One thing to notice is that in both of these scenarios, for both the dogs and the wizards, you're keeping track of the same properties for all of the dogs or all of the wizards. So by creating a constructor, you'll still be setting all of the properties as they should be set, and it can become a lot easier. So how do we create a constructor? So remember, a constructor is just a template for the object. We're not actually putting in values for the most part. We're just putting in whatever's passed in as a parameter. So over here, for example, we have a constructor called name. You always want to make sure that the first letter is capital to show that it's not a variable, it is a constructor. And then you have any parameters that you want to pass in, and then you can go ahead and set the different values. So over here, for example, we have our dog constructor. We're passing in age, breed, gender, name, and you can see we're setting the 4 properties: age, breed, gender, and name. So how do we use our template? The way you use your template is by creating the variable for the object you want and then setting it to the new and then your constructor name and passing in any parameters you have. So here we have new, and then the constructor name is dog, so we put dog here, and then we pass in the age, breed, gender, name, which in this case are 5, Pomeranian, female, and Temmie. So we're using new because it is a new dog object. Next, how do we access the data? So we can find the data like we would typically with objects. So you can just do variable name dot property name. If you find that the values are undefined, it's probably because you didn't create your object properly, since undefined means that there's no value. So our goal for today is to create store items. So players should be able to purchase upgrades to improve their cookies per click and cookies per second, or any other things that you might want to add. Today we'll create an object template to represent one of the possible items they can buy. So the first thing we want to do is create the constructor, the template. So you want to think about the key properties of an item in our shop. So in this case, it's going to be the name of the object, the label in our store, the cost of the object, and the action to run. So when we create our constructor, we have to make sure that we define those 4 properties: And so this is an example constructor right here. So go ahead, pause the video, try this step. You can reference this as needed as an example, and make sure you're adding these 4 different properties. Resume the video once you are done. Okay, now we'll do a quick challenge. So one other property, so not all properties have to be assigned. So some of them we can give exact values when inside of the constructor. So over here, for example, if I know all of my objects are going to have a initial temperature of very hot, I can just straight up put it inside of the constructor instead of having to pass it in every time. So similarly, I want you to go ahead and add a property for the number of items purchased and set it to 0 inside of your constructor. So pause the video, quickly do this challenge, and then resume it when you are done. Now we will be going over functions. So a property can hold a function as its value, allowing it to perform an action. So over here, for example, you can have this dot method name is equal to function, and then you put your code inside of here. So this one, for example, has a print price function that allows it to print the price when it's called. The way you would call it is by saying the item, so that's going to be your object name, dot the function name, and then you also want to make sure you're using parentheses since you are calling a function. So now I want you to add a purchase function to your store item template that purchases your item. When subtracting the cost, make sure to use the object's cost so the correct amount is subtracted from our cookies balance. Also, make sure that if it's being purchased, they do have enough cookies to purchase it. Remember to use this dot property. So quickly pause the video, complete this step, and resume the video when you are done. Now I will quickly go over the answer. So if you are having any trouble or you're not really sure how to get started, you can take a look at this and see if that can help a bit. So this is going to be our store item constructor. So as you can see, I have a capital letter here, and then I have my 4 parameters here. So I have name, label, cost, and action. Here you can see I'm setting my 4 properties, name, label, cost, action, and then I'm also setting this num purchase property, which is going to be the same for all objects initially, so it's going to be 0. Here I'm setting my purchase function, so you can see I'm checking if I currently have enough cookies to buy this item. Then I'm going to go ahead and subtract the cost. I'm going to do whatever action this is, so I'm calling that action, and then I'm going to increase the amount of items purchased. And then if I don't have enough cookies, I'm not going to do anything. So go ahead and take a look at this if you're having trouble and try to do it yourself. So now we will be learning about anonymous functions. So anonymous functions are called anonymous because they don't have a name, and they're often used as parameters to other functions or constructors. So over here, for example, I'm passing this anonymous function in to a constructor to make an object. So we'll be putting the anonymous function that we make directly as a parameter for the constructor for our store item object. We can use these functions to increment variables such as increasing the number of cookies per click when our store item is purchased. So this is another example of an anonymous function that increases a variable. So what I want you guys to work on is creating instances of the object. So now that we've created the store item template, let's create 2 store item objects with it. Remember, we need to create a variable and then define it as a store item object by filling out the template. In this example, we'll fill out the sun template with x and y coordinates in the radius to create the medium sun object. So remember, this example, this is just one object. You want 2 of them, one for cookies per click, one for cookies per second. And remember to use anonymous functions to pass an action. So as a reminder, we're trying to make one store item that increases cookies per click and one that increases cookies per second. So go ahead, pause the video, work on this, and resume the video when you are done. Now we will be working on calling the purchase function. So we're almost done. We have everything set up, but now we want to go ahead and make sure that we're calling the purchase function. So we already have our two store item objects and a function to purchase them. So now we want to actually call it. We do this by calling the name of the variable, whatever you name them, and then adding a dot and the name of the function like we always do. And then make sure you're adding the parentheses since you are calling a function. Go ahead, pause the video, add this, and then we will move on to the next part. Okay, so let me quickly go over the answer. So over here, when you're creating the objects, you want to make sure you're passing in your 4 items. So you have your name, your label. These are both going to be strings. You have your cost, which is how many cookies you want it to cost. And then over here, you have your function. So in this case, this is going to increase the cookies per click. Over here, it's going to increase the cookies per second. And you can see how these have different cost. This one's more expensive since it helps more, and you can see how the labels are pretty helpful in telling you what it does, and then the names can be anything you want. And then you want to make sure you're adding the call to the purchase function so it's actually being called. Now make sure you save your project so that you have your work for the next class, and then we'll go over some recap. So press that blue button real quick so that you see it's gray, and then once it is and it says saved, you are good to go. So some quick recap questions. First, what is a constructor? So go ahead, pause the video, think about that, resume that when you're done. So a constructor is a template for objects. Next, how do we create objects using a constructor? Once again, pause the video, think about it. You can create an object using a constructor by saying var object name is equal to new constructor name, and then passing in any parameters you have inside of the parentheses, and always ending the line with a semicolon. Next, how do we access properties of an object? Like we learned previously, you can access properties by using dot notation or bracket notation. So there we go, we have our object, and that's what it looks like. So if you're in the fall or spring session, as always, the Tuesday and Sunday office hours, and otherwise that is it. That's the end of lesson 3, so thank you for listening.